Hello friends, welcome to the next episode of DotVVM Minutes. In this episode I will be talking about action filters and exception filters, and I will show you some tips and tricks how to globally handle domain exceptions in your application. So you don't need to put the try-catch blocks in all methods you are calling, and you can use a global filter to catch exceptions and to display some unified user interface so it's consistent across the entire application. I have this very simple demo application. It's some kind of warehouse management system. I have 3 warehouses for ingredients for my hamburger restaurant, and I want to reserve some items on the stock so they wouldn't be given to someone else. So I would need to reserve some items on my restaurant. So I can click here and choose some quantities of which ingredients I want, and then I can just reserve, so it will make the reservation. So for example, I want to reserve 10 wheat buns and one of all other items. So let's click on reserve, and the reservation is done. However, in this process, sometimes we get some errors. So for example, some warehouse is not operational because there is some kind of vacation or something like that. So when I try to reserve items in this, you can see that there is a problem. So the application needs to report me this error, and it is doing it via this alert. So one of the things I would like to have across my all application is to display the same error to the user like on all pages. So if any page, whenever error appears, I want to see this error message that would be looking exactly like that. It would be on the same place, etc. For this, I'm now using the alert control from DotVVM Business Pack, which is a commercial product, but it's very easy to create your own. If you want to stay on the open source version of DotVVM without paying anything, you can just display some div element and change its visible property. So now at that moment it will appear. So whenever I get any exception in the application, I want to display the alert. However, if I'm working in some modal dialogs, for example here, and I want to reserve some amount of which is not available on the stock, now it doesn't make sense to display the alert like on the previous location, because it would be hidden behind the alert and it wouldn't be very visible. So it's better to display the alert on top of this dialog. So how it's done? So I click on the reserve, and you can see now the alert was displayed here and not here. Yeah? So there needs to be some logic that is telling the application where to display the alerts and how to do that. But I want to make this behavior generic without the necessity to put try-catch blocks everywhere. Yeah? So let's look how to implement this kind of experience. First thing I would like to mention is that I was using something like a domain-driven design in this demo application. Of course, it's very simple because there is no database, nothing like that. But I have a class warehouse which has some properties like the name, location, and things like that, whether it's operational or not. And I have all the business logic like nested in this class. So for example, the reservation of quantities is here. I'll pass the list of items I want to reserve, and it's doing some logic. It has to be thread safe because for every warehouse I will have only one instance in memory. So that's why I'm locking here, and I'm just decreasing the amounts in here. And also when I want to report available quantities, also I will lock the list. Then I will create copies of the object. I will export some model objects. It's important to say that this is a business layer thing. So the warehouse class, it never gets to the presentation layer, to the view models of .vvm. Never. Always when I'm working with this, I'm working with this through models. So in the grid, the list of warehouses is actually a list of these models. Also, the dialog is working with these models, and you can see these are only like plain old CLR objects with get set properties on everything. But this domain object, it doesn't have all properties writable. Yeah, so this is responsible for keeping the logic. And around this model object, I only have this warehouse service, which on the startup, it generates some things. You know that everything here is static, so it will just pre-populate some data because I don't have the database. And otherwise, also this warehouse service only works with models. So input and output for this service are the model objects, not the domain object. Domain objects only like guard all the application logic, nothing else. Yeah. And the business layer or the domain model, it throws exceptions. So for example, if I'm trying to work with a not operational warehouse, I'm getting warehouse not operational exception. Yeah. So for example, if I want to get quantities on the warehouse, like if it's not operational, I'm throwing an exception. Yeah. And also when I try to reserve something what is not present in the stock, I'm trying to reserve more than I actually have. Also, I have like warehouse insufficient quantity exception. Yeah, so I have typed exceptions for all problems that can occur in the application, and all of these exceptions, they inherit from domain exception. That's also my decision to make, and I want like to distinguish between developer errors and between like business logic errors. So whenever it's a business logic error, like I'm trying to reserve more than I actually have, like technically it could be reserved because there's no problem in the application, but there is the problem in the real world. I don't have the items to reserve, then it's a domain exception. And if it's some error in the code, like some null reference exception or anything like that, I don't want these exceptions to inherit from domain exception. So when I'm getting an exception and it's a domain exception, I know that I can show the error message to the user because it makes sense for the user. The user will understand what's going on. If I would be showing like the message from null reference exception, the user wouldn't actually know what it is about because it's about some null references. User doesn't know what is null reference. Yeah, so I have this base class for all my domain exceptions, so I can distinguish between like developer errors, which needs some developer to go in the code and fix it, and between like the domain errors, which happen in the real world all the time. Right. So my warehouse service, I'm calling from the view model, I'm calling these functions on warehouse service, for example, get warehouses, and here in load quantities, I'm calling like get available quantities. And these methods return model objects, which I have then in the view models. Yeah, so it's model. And also here, it's also data set of warehouse models, not the domain object. And basically that's it. And sometimes this business logic service can throw exception, and I want the exceptions to be handled. So for example, here in the grid view, I have the reserve button, yeah, so the blue button, and when I try to reserve something from a non-operational warehouse, I'm getting this alert. But if you look in this start reservation method, you can see there is no try catch block, nothing like that. I'm only calling reservation dialog load quantities, which is basically just storing the warehouse ID because I need to know for what warehouse I have opened the model dialog. And then it's calling get available quantities. And this method can throw exceptions because it's like throwing exceptions actually, but I don't have any try catch here. Yeah. This is done by a global exception filter. Basically, you can apply filters either globally or on some specific places. I have this class, alert exception filter, and I could apply it like this. Yeah, using an attribute. It's similar to authorize attribute, for example, in ASP.NET MVC or also in .vvm. So you can apply the filter on top of the, just as an attribute on the method. You can apply it on the viewModel class. I could also apply it here, alert exception filter. Or I can apply it globally, which you can do in .vvm startup. And here you can say config.runtime global filters add, and you will add this filter here. So basically that's it. And how the filter is implemented, it's quite simple. It's a class which inherits from exception filter attribute. And you have quite a lot of methods you can override here. And one of these methods is onCommand exception async. It's triggered whenever you have a command binding. So this binding, this kind of binding, it doesn't work for static commands, by the way. And that's it. So whenever this command throws an exception, you will get this method called. And basically, you can see I have a problem here. Basically, what I'm doing, if the exception is domain exception, then I'm using its message, because the user, it's the exception from the real world. The user will understand, like you don't have 200 wheat buns on the stock, so you cannot reserve it. This is understandable for the user. So if it's a domain exception, I'm using this message. If it's any other exception which doesn't inherit from domain exception, I want to display something to the user too, but like the null reference exception wouldn't tell anything to the user. So I'm using, for other exceptions, I'm using this prefabricated message, which users probably will hate, but it's better than other things, because still the user wouldn't understand what's going on. Of course, you should also have some proper logging so you can see in the error logs what is the actual exception, because if the user will send you a screenshot, you will never see what's going on. Okay, so this is how to get the message of the exception, and basically I'm looking to context.viewModel. Let's put this logic aside, but context.viewModel is the view model of the current page. And if it's implementing the interface iViewModel with alert, then I'm applying this logic. And iViewModel with alert, it's my own interface I have created. And basically, it declares two properties, alert type and alert text. Alert type is the business pack enum for the alert component from business pack. Alert text is just the text message. So basically, if my page is implementing this interface, I will set this alert type to danger and alert text to the actual message. And the alert control is smart enough, so if this alert text is empty, it will be hidden, it will never show. So it's displayed only when there is some message. And also, I need to tell .vvm that I don't want to continue with any other actions, so just return the error to the user, and like that's it. No error screen should be displayed, because we have already handled this exception, so .vvm doesn't need to do anything else. Okay, so that's it. So that's why I don't need to have any try-catch block here, because if this method throws an exception from its internal logic, then .vvm will catch this using this global filter, which is registered here in .vvm startup, like this. Okay, so now this is fine, but what happens? What if I try to reserve something in the modal dialog? And how come the alert was displayed here and not on the page? Because I was working with the view model of the page. That's another interface I have created. It's not part of .vvm, it's part of my sample project, so feel free to use it. Basically, if the page can display modal dialogs, I have created another interface that will tell this filter whether the modal dialog is open or not. And I'm doing it like this. So there is a method called try_get_open_dialog_viewModel. So if there is some dialog which is open, So this method should return its view model. If it's no, if the no dialog is open, it will return null. And that's exactly what I've implemented here in this default view model. So it's implementing iViewModel with dialog. And basically, I'm doing it like this. If the reservation dialog is open, then I will return the view model of the reservation dialog. Otherwise, I'm returning null. And that's what the action filter or the exception filter can tackle, because I'm looking at the view model of the page. And if it's view model with dialog, then I will try to call try_get_open_dialog view model. And if it's not null, this is a trick. So this pattern will evaluate if the dialog is something. If it's not null, then I'm saying like put it in this dialog view model property. And if the current page is dialog and there is some dialog open, I will say, okay, the view model I will be working with is not the page view model, but it's this dialog view model. And because I can nest dialogs in each other, so from this model dialog I can open another model dialog. So that's why there is the while loop, because while it's still the model dialog with some other open model dialogs, that's why I will get to the most current model dialog, which is on the top of the stack. Yeah? And if this view model of this dialog is this iViewModel with alert, it will set the alert type and alert text on the dialog view model and not on the page view model. So by combination of these two interfaces I have created, I have quite a robust infrastructure to deal with global exception handling in every application. Yeah? So in my reservation dialog view model, it's a good idea to create a special view model for model dialogs. Yeah? Because sometimes when the dialog gets too complicated, you may want to just create a separate page from this dialog. So you already will have the view model class for the page. Yeah, you wouldn't need to do any refactoring. So it's a good idea. And I've also created this base class for dialog view models, which basically has the open and close methods, which I can directly call from anywhere. And there is also this isOpen property, which indicates whether the dialog is open or closed. And so in this dialog, I'm also implementing iViewModel with alert, and I'm implementing alert type, alert text. This trick is also very useful because when the server produces some exception, it will set these properties and you need them to transfer to the client. But when the user triggers another command, you don't need these values again. So if you set the bind direction to server to client, basically they will not be sent from the client to the server and they will reset automatically. Which is what exactly you want, because if the user is doing another action, you don't want to display the alert from the previous action. Yeah? So either the new version will be with null or with a new exception. So that's a good idea to implement this like that. And also because I want the alerts everywhere, I have implemented this in the master page, so all the pages will get this logic basically for free. And then you just need to use the control which will display the alert. So in my case it's BP alert, and I'm binding the type and text properties. And I have the same thing in my model dialog, so that's how I'm achieving that the two model the alerts look the same. So basically that's it. So to summarize, I'm using global exception filter which inherits from exception filter attribute. This exception on command exception method will be called whenever I'm calling command in .vvm and I'm getting an exception. So that's how I'm doing it. If the exception inherits from domain exception, I will show the user the actual message from the exception. Otherwise, I'm using just the generic an unexpected error occurred, sorry about that. Then this logic will see if there is some open model dialog in the page. If it is, it will show the alert in the dialog. Otherwise, it will show the dialog in the page. And I'm using this iView model with alert interface, which specifies the alert type and alert text properties. So the filter can then set these values to these properties. And I'm calling context is command exception handled to let DotVVM know that it doesn't have to show the error page because the exception was handled by me. So this is the filter. You need to register it here. And in the DotVVM startup, in the configure method, so config runtime global filters add, and you will add the new filter. And finally, I have created two interfaces. First is iView model with alert, which defines alert type and alert text properties. You can use them to store the current error message and what color the alert should have. And also iView model with dialog. This helps this action filter to discover whether the page has some open modal dialog. If there is some open modal dialog, the alert will be shown in the modal dialog view model. Otherwise, it will be set in the page view model. So that's my infrastructure. I hope that this demo was useful for you. It can be very nice if you apply it in a large application with hundreds of pages. Then error handling can be done consistently and easily without too many try-catch blocks in the entire application, and all the errors would be presented to the user by the same way. Even if your application has modal dialogues, this solution assumes that the modal dialogues can be there, so it provides you with some interfaces you can implement to let the action filter know about the modal dialog. So try DotVVM. If you run into any problems, just tell us on our social media, or you can contact us on our Gitter chat, and we'll be happy to talk if you have any ideas or suggestions. So see you next time and in another episode of DotVVM Minutes.